Excellencies, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I thank the Foreign Ministry of Poland for honouring the remarkable life and work of Raphael Lemkin. If those who work in genocide prevention today can see far, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants, there being no greater giant in this field than Raphael Lemkin. We owe Lemkin not only because he gave definition to a crime previously without a name, but for his deep insights from comparative history about the nature of this specific harm to humanity, and his tireless campaign to turn his vision into practical action. Lemkin's work began in 1921, following the trial of Sogom and Tellurian. This young Armenian man was prosecuted in Berlin for assassinating Talat Pasha, one of the architects of the destruction of the Armenians during the First World War, including Tellurian's own family. That very same year, the British released nearly 150 Ottoman officers suspected of crimes against the Armenians. Lemkin was shocked. He said, "A man is punished when he kills another man. Why is the killing of 1 million a lesser crime than the killing of a single individual?" he asked. He didn't have all the answers, but embarked on a mission to ensure that one day a law against racial and religious murder would be adopted by the world so that states could no longer hide behind their sovereignty and murder their own civilians. During the Holocaust, 49 members of his own Jewish family perished in Nazi-occupied Poland, victims of the very crime Lemkin had been urging the world to ban in the preceding 2 decades. Despite his personal experience of the all-out genocide to destroy the Jews of Europe, he wasn't interested in establishing a hierarchy of suffering. His impartial analysis allowed him to have no inconsistency in writing about anti-Semitism and pogroms in Poland of Jews during and after the First World War, whilst recognizing at the same time how the Polish nation was under threat of destruction and genocide itself from the occupying Nazis, then the Soviets. I have no doubt, reading his concepts, that had Lemkin been alive, he wouldn't have waited until 1994 to recognize genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, or call it by its name. He would have immediately recognized that genocide had taken root in November of 1959. And regardless of the Cold War, he would have campaigned in New York and Geneva throughout the 1960s against genocide in Rwanda, calling for prosecution and prevention. Lemkin's proposals weren't readily embraced, and when he pushed the newly formed United Nations to recognize the crime of genocide in international law, it was against all odds. The superpowers were resistant. Britain did its best to distract from Lemkin's efforts and successfully opposed the concept of cultural genocide being included in the Genocide Convention. While the interwar Polish government discouraged Lemkin's early attempts to outlaw the destruction of minority groups through the League of Nations in Madrid in 1933, the post-Second World War Polish government was among the early supporters of Lemkin's efforts, and along with Lithuania and Hungary, Poland helped to achieve critical momentum, perhaps relating to the Genocide Convention's aims on account of the Nazi and Soviet occupations. Now, Lemkin's contribution to defining genocide in international law is well documented, and there's still much to do. Ending impunity and bringing justice for victims remains a challenge for the international community. Hundreds of fugitives from the 1994 genocide are at large, many of them in Europe. However, his concern was not only for the punishment, but also the prevention, reflected in the dual nature of the obligations under the convention. And his vision was also to establish an institute to study genocide, identify those at risk, raise the alarm, and develop strategies through which nations could prevent and protect the vulnerable. He would have been especially pleased at the establishment of the UN's Office of the Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention, and to hear that Adama Dieng has renewed a campaign for the ratification of the UN Genocide Convention in its 70th year. But we should go further to fulfill Lemkin's vision. We should build national capacities to give governments access to impartial advice and analysis to help make decisions of how to respond, how to develop prevention strategies for specific situations. And to prevent genocide, we need to understand Lemkin's broader insights into the concept, the bits excluded from the genocide prevention. And if the distinguished lawyers and judges will forgive me for entering into a discussion on the definitions outside the convention and the Rome Statute. You know, in 1994, in the Axis rule in occupied Europe that the minister referred to, Lemkin defined genocide as the coordinated actions to destroy the foundations, the very foundations of a life of a group of people. And this definition included what's been referred to as cultural genocide, left out of the convention, that targets the very fabric that holds a group of people together, aiming to disintegrate a group's political and social institutions, its culture, language, national feelings, religion, its economic existence, personal security, liberty, health, and dignity. Now, if none of this made the cut in the definition in the Genocide Convention, why even mention it? And for this reason: prevention strategies. The cultural genocide described by Lemkin is part of a continuum, a pathway to genocide, which is about the exclusion of people based on their identity. It aims at breaking the group, degrading it, causing migration and dispersion. Cultures immune to genocide, according to Lemkin, are pluralistic, diverse, and inclusive. And the second reason we talk about these definitions outside of the convention that Lemkin described are the warning signs. When we see monuments being destroyed, churches, mosques, or synagogues burning, this may be a sign of genocidal ideology. When the language, leaders, and institutions, such as libraries that represent the identity of a group, are destroyed, alarm bells need to ring. To Lemkin, the anti-Jewish measures in the 1930s, including the burning of books of Jewish origin, Jewish authors in 1933, long before there was mass murder of Jews, these were all efforts at the economic, social, and cultural exclusion, destroying a group based on their identity. As Heinrich Heine, the German Jewish poet, maybe prophesied in 1823, where they burn books, they will in the end be burning people. Another warning sign: when we see lines of refugees queuing at our borders, we need to ask how many African and other migrants are forced out of their home and need refuge because of the heinous crimes that we're talking about. 75% of the 65 million refugees languishing in the world, according to Aegis Trust estimate, are from places where mass atrocities have either occurred or are at risk. We don't have time to talk about the large physical spectrum of physical destruction that Lemkin described, but I do want to mention he emphasized that mass killing and mass murder was not the only means to destroy groups. Undermining their livelihoods, blocking food, stopping them farming is another means. And when we see people starving, we always need to ask the question: are they starving because somebody intends them to starve? I also want to make very brief reference to the huge amount of work and writing that Lemkin did on colonial genocide. He studied not only the British atrocities in Tasmania, where we hunted the indigenous populations, but also the Herero in German Southwest Africa. And he recognized that the 1904-1905 atrocities had an impact on German policy during the Second World War, that though Germany had lost its colonies at the end of the First World War, it started a new colonial enterprise based on the same principles of race supremacy and the subjugation of a nation through killing and enslavement. Lemkin spoke about what makes genocide possible, and therefore we can think about what makes genocide impossible. He gave a warning for our times, and I quote, "Fear and impatience in dealing with the vexing problems represented by a group of human beings might easily lead to the temptation of attempting a final solution of the problem. This is exactly the climate that originates genocide. It's easy for leaders," this is not Lemkin, this is me, "easy for leaders to see global and societal problems through a security lens, often blaming or scapegoating a whole group. But when states develop anti-terrorist or counterinsurgency measures, we always have to be aware that if a collective is being blamed by media or politicians, there is a danger that that collective may end up being punished." Lemkin wrote about the propaganda techniques that keep populations subjugated. He could be writing for our times about how media sow discord, misrepresent and deceive. People readily become perpetrators because they are led to believe themselves that they are under existential threat. German Nazi media equated all Jews with Bolsheviks. Hutu propaganda equated all Tutsi with the insurgency. This is why the essence of the Education for Sustainable Peace program is designed to do just the opposite, to build resilience against such propaganda and this pathway to violence. Though the righteous among the nations, those who rescued during the Holocaust and here in Rwanda may have been a minority, these courageous people are not only celebrated, but we learn from them. It is their attributes that have informed the education programs, the peace education programs, to strengthen critical thinking, empathy, and to develop the individual sense of personal agency, that each of us can bring about a change and make a stand. Aegis Trust is grateful for the support we received from the Swedish and the British and the Belgian governments, and for the the Education for Sustainable Peace program, and for our other donors and partners, including the USAID and the Netherlands Embassy, the Pears Foundation, GIZ, UNICEF, and all our partners. And Poland is a natural ally in preventing genocide, not least the connection to the Holocaust, the commitment to the preservation of its memory, and being one of the early adopters of the UN Genocide Convention. Just as out of the national and personal tragedy in Poland, the Genocide Convention was gifted to the world, so the tragedy in Rwanda, commemorated this week, has given birth to peace building and peace education. Both the Polish and the Rwandan governments share a commitment to protecting civilians at risk. And I hope that Poland and Rwanda can join together in taking peace education to other countries at risk in Africa and beyond, to build resilience against mass atrocities. Often mass atrocities are seen as intractable. We only need to think of Syria today. But I make an appeal to Security Council members, in particular for the Central African Republic today, where a Rwandan peacekeeper was killed in Bangui only this week, during the commemoration week. And Aegis Trust have our colleagues, our Rwandan colleague educators, working to try and bring prevention from the experience in Rwanda. I make the appeal because it's not intractable there. We need the support. Central Africa Republic needs our support. It needs a Security Council support, because these are preventable atrocities. And to conclude, in his life, Lemkin's reward for his campaigns was poverty, barely able to pay his rent and an early grave, a handful of people attending his funeral. I'm therefore grateful to the government of Poland to ensure that Raphael Lemkin's legacy for the world is rightly recognised. The work he began is needed now more than ever before, as the erosion of humanitarian values and extremism, fueled in part by fear of mass migration, are leaving people under threat. In accepting the Raphael Lemkin International Award, Aegis Trust is deeply honoured. We accept it on behalf of all our staff, our volunteers, but all our partners, including our government partners and our supporters who've made the programmes possible here in Rwanda. We're humbled that our own small contribution to prevention is being recognised. And we hope that it will inspire us, all of us, and future generations to redouble our efforts to preserve memory, share painful past experiences with openness, and ensure that there's correct attribution and responsibility for past injustices, and above all, to protect equally all vulnerable groups. Raphael Lemkin was a great son of Poland and of the Jewish people. Here in Rwanda, the description given to him is one that we may all aspire to. Ubuntu, a member of humanity with greatness of heart. Thank you.